Tony sat at the head of the table, his eyes narrowed as he listened to the reports from his crew. The West Side gang was at war with the East Side, and things were getting heated. But Tony had more on his mind than just the turf war. He was in love with Maria, the sister of the East Side's leader. And if anyone found out, it would mean the end of both their lives. As the meeting came to a close, Tony's second-in-command, Jake, approached him with a concerned look on his face. "Boss, you okay? You seem distracted." Tony sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm fine, Jake. Just a lot on my mind." Jake nodded, but Tony could tell he wasn't convinced. He knew he couldn't keep his feelings for Maria a secret forever. Sooner or later, someone was bound to find out. And when they did, there would be hell to pay. As Tony made his way through the crowded streets, his mind was racing. He had to find a way to be with Maria, but he knew it would mean going against everything he had ever known. The West Side and the East Side were sworn enemies, and a relationship between their leaders' siblings would be seen as betrayal. But Tony couldn't help how he felt. Maria was the only person who had ever seen through his tough exterior and touched his heart. He knew he had to find a way to be with her, no matter the cost. As he turned down a deserted alley, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. Spinning around, he saw Maria's brother, Diego, walking towards him with a menacing look on his face. "Tony," Diego growled. "I hear you have been seeing my sister." Tony squared his shoulders and met Diego's gaze head-on. "I have," he said firmly. "And I'm not going to stop." Diego's eyes narrowed. "You know what this means, don't you? If you don't end things with Maria, there will be consequences." Tony's heart pounded in his chest. He knew Diego wasn't bluffing. But he also knew he couldn't walk away from Maria. It was time to make a choice, and the consequences of that choice would change his life forever. Tony sat on the roof of the abandoned building, staring out at the city below. He had made his decision, and now he was just waiting for the fallout. He knew he had chosen love over loyalty, and there was no turning back. As the sun began to set, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Maria walking towards him, a look of determination on her face. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "I know what you did for me." Tony stood up and took her hand. "I love you, Maria. And I'm not going to let anyone come between us." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Tony. But I know this isn't going to be easy. Our families are enemies, and there will be consequences for our choices." Tony wrapped his arms around her. "I don't care about consequences. As long as I have you, I can face anything." As they stood together, watching the sun set over the city, Tony knew that he had finally found his heart's true home. The next few weeks were tense as Tony and Maria tried to navigate their new relationship in secret. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to make it work. As the leader of the West Side gang, Tony was used to taking charge and making tough decisions. But this was different. He had never been in love before, and the feelings he had for Maria were unlike anything he had ever experienced. One night, as they were walking home from a late movie, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them. Tony tensed, immediately on high alert. He turned to see a group of East Side gang members approaching them, led by Diego. "Tony," Diego said coldly. "I see you haven't ended things with my sister yet." Tony stepped forward, his hand on the gun at his side. "I'm not going to end things with Maria. I love her, and I'm not going to let anyone come between us." Diego's eyes narrowed. "You know what this means, don't you? This is war." Tony knew he was right. The relationship between the West Side and the East Side had always been strained, but now it was about to explode. And he knew there would be casualties on both sides. But as he stood there, with Maria by his side, he knew he had made the right decision. He was ready to fight for their love, no matter what the cost. The war between the West Side and the East Side was brutal and unforgiving. Tony and Maria knew they were taking a risk by being together, but they couldn't help how they felt. They were in love, and they were willing to fight for each other. As the leader of the West Side, Tony threw himself into the fight with everything he had. He knew he had a responsibility to his gang, and he was determined to protect them at all costs. But as the body count began to rise, he couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. Maria was fighting her own battles on the East Side. As the sister of the gang leader, she was expected to toe the line and stay out of the fight. But she couldn't stand by and watch as the people she loved were caught in the crossfire. As the war dragged on, Tony and Maria found themselves caught in the middle. They knew they had to find a way to end the fighting, or risk losing everything they held dear. One night, as they lay in bed together, Tony turned to Maria and said, "We have to stop this. We have to find a way to end the war." Maria nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know. But how?" Tony thought for a moment. "We have to talk to our leaders. We have to find a way to broker peace between the West Side and the East Side." Maria looked at him in shock. "You want to go behind their backs? That's treason." Tony took her hand. "I don't care. As long as we're together, nothing else matters." The next day, they approached their leaders with their plan. It was risky, but they knew it was the only way. And to their surprise, the leaders listened. As they sat across from each other, hammering out the terms of a peace treaty, Tony knew he had made the right decision. He was fighting for something bigger than just the West Side or the East Side. He was fighting for love.